Hi everyone, welcome back to the Edgewater Avenue YouTube channel. In today's video, we are making the brand new Carly bottoms. These bottoms are a collaboration pattern with one of my favorite sewers on Instagram, @SewnlyFans. Isn't that just the best username? So let's hop right into it. These bottoms are a crossover style pattern that comes with a lot of different options. First, you're going to need to decide what rise you want. There are two combinations that will result in a high rise and one combination that will result in more of a mid rise. So view A is a high rise with a narrow band. View B is also a high rise, but it uses the shorter base and it pairs it with a thick band. And view C uses that same shorter base, but with a narrow band. So overall it sits lower. Then once you decide which style, which rise you want to make, you can decide what coverage option you want. There is a full coverage and a cheeky coverage. Now there's a lot of different pieces in this one with all the different options that are included. So if you go to the pieces included section of the written directions, that should give you a one-pager that outlines everything you need. In today's video, I'm making a view B, which is the high rise with the thicker band, and I'm doing it in a full coverage. So I have these pieces that I need to work with. Note that if you're making the mid-rise version, you'll have these same pieces, but you're going to need to cut the back piece shorter along this cut line. But since we're doing the thick band, we're leaving the pattern pieces as is. For materials, you will need swimwear fabric. You'll need around 3/4 of a yard up to 1 yard in total. And this style is intended to be reversible / made with all concealed seams. So we are using regular swimwear fabric for both layers. You'll notice a lot of the times that I refer to the layers as the lining and the main fabric, but they are the same thing. We're not using mesh swimwear lining in this. So my bluish gray fabric is my lining fabric, quote unquote, and my green fabric is my main fabric. These are actually the exact same fabric, just different colorways. You're also going to need 1/4 inch or 6mm swimwear elastic. This is rubber elastic and it is the best choice for making swimwear. It's the best choice for sewing swimwear in terms of its quality, in terms of its longevity, and the amount of tension it holds on the seams. And I sell this elastic on my website under the sewing supplies section. That is it for materials. This one's super simple, so now we can begin cutting. So I'm going to begin by cutting in my lining fabric, and I'm going to cut one front piece and one back piece. In total, we'll be cutting 2 fronts and 2 backs. So once you've cut your lining pieces, you can switch over to your main fabric and cut an additional front and back piece. In the main fabric, we're also going to cut 2 band pieces. This pattern piece is cut on the fold, so pay attention to where the fold line is. And after filming, we did decide to put some notches on the band and on the front piece. So if you want to use those to help kind of clarify what gets attached to where, you can transfer those notches now. Now that we have all of our pieces, we can begin construction. First, we're going to be using a basting stitch to tack together some seams before we go to attach elastic. So match your back pieces with right sides together and sew along the leg holes and the waistline. You're also going to match your front pieces with right sides together, and this time you're only going to be sewing the leg holes, leaving the waistline untouched. A basting stitch is a long straight stitch that's meant to be temporary, and the point here is to tack our pieces together before going in with elastic, so we can see how everything is laying and make sure we can easily go back and correct any misalignments now. Really, this is just an alternative to pinning. One tip that Carly brought up that a lot of people in pattern testing liked is instead of using your machine's basting stitch, you can actually do this by hand and hand baste. Some testers found that helped you get a little more control and be a little more exact versus having to deal with machine tension again. Once you're happy with how your basting turned out, we can now move on to our final stitch and to attaching elastic. So we're going to sew along the exact same seams we just sewed, but this time you're going to use an overlock, zigzag, or stretch stitch of your choice. And at the same time, we will be attaching your 1/4 inch elastic to these seams. Here I'm using an elastic foot, which is also called a tape foot, and the point of this is just to guide the elastic as I'm sewing. You don't need this foot in order to complete this step. You can just use your fingers to help guide the elastic in the right place. I prefer to use zero tension on this elastic. I just want it to sew on nice and even. However, another thing you can do that Carly prefers is adding some tension to the back leg lines to help it cling better and stay in place. You can decide how much you want to pull, just depending on your preferences for how the elastic fits you. People have really strong preferences as to whether or not they want a barely there type of elastic feel or something that really clings and stays in place. Also, it doesn't matter which side you attach the elastic, it's more important that you have good elastic application, but I do recommend you attach it all to the same side. So here I'm attaching it all to my green fabric. And before moving on, I recommend that you either break or remove the basting stitches underneath, otherwise those threads will break when you put the bottoms on, or they might fit awkwardly tight in some areas. I usually just go in and gently break the stitches, but you can also use a seam ripper and pick them out. Now we're going to be doing some prep on our band pieces, so get each band piece out and flip it so wrong sides are together and the raw edges are lined up. We are going to do another basting stitch and sew the band pieces closed to help make them easier to manage in the next step. I didn't sew one of the sides closed because I'll be doing it later, but it also doesn't really matter if you prefer to do that now. And again, you can do this basting with your machine or by hand if you prefer. Okay, so this is definitely where things get confusing and where this bottoms pattern diverts from any other bottoms pattern that I've made before. So I'm going to present a couple different methods for attaching the band. I recommend that you watch all the different methods and you watch through the tips first and then you start sewing. Some of these methods or tips might make more sense to you than others, so by watching them first, you can make the decision on which one is best for you. First off, I'm going to start with a tip that works for any of the methods that you use. I recommend taking some scissors and snipping the center front of the front piece. This is going to help you attach the band because then you can move the front piece to match the sharp angle we're trying to achieve here. There is a 1/4 inch of seam allowance, so try to make a snip smaller than that. So the first option for attaching the band is attaching the band pieces together before even putting them in the front piece at all. If you do that, you'll lay your band pieces on top of each other so the folded edge is up top and the basted edges are lying down together. Then you can use a basting stitch and run across where the band pieces meet. Now you have one band assembly and you can place this into the front piece like I'm going to do in the next steps. A second option here is attaching the band pieces separately. So open up one layer of the front and place the basted edge of one band piece against the raw edge of the waistline. Remember, there are notches to help you figure out what orientation this needs to go. If you've matched this up correctly, the long basted edge should line up to the center front. Then you'll see we have this excess, and that's going to be the crossover onto the other side. So use pins or clips as needed and pivot the crossover onto the other side of the center front. Now we're going to use a basting stitch to sew down the first band onto one layer of the waistline. Before moving on, check that you like how it's all looking and go back and fix anything if needed. Now we're going to be attaching our second band, and this is where we merge with the third method, but I will get back to that later. So here we're going to be attaching our second band just like we did with the first. We're going to repeat the exact same steps and base the second band onto the opposite side of the waist, again having some crossover at that corner. And here we are trying to keep that corner nice and sharp. Then I mentioned that we have a third option, and for that we're going back to where we just have one band piece attached. Instead of attaching the second band right on top, you can instead attach the second band to the other layer of the front piece. Just make sure it's on the opposite side. All of these methods will ultimately achieve the exact same thing. It's just up to which one you prefer, which one makes the most sense to you. So now we have our waistbands attached into the front piece, and we are now going to seal up the waistband and finish it. Because of the thickness of the band, you might need to roll it up so it's out of the way and tucked inside the 2 layers of the front piece. So match up the waistlines of the front piece and use plenty of pins or clips. You're going to sew all along the waistline to finish up this seam and secure the band in. I, of course, like to do this first with a basting stitch. And instead of sewing this in one step, you can achieve a sharper corner if you sew one side at a time, starting from the side seam and ending at the center front. Then, before doing your final stitch, I suggest you take the front piece all the way to the right side and just make sure you like how the band is looking. If everything is good to go, then you can take the front piece back inside out and we will sew our final stitch. This can be an overlock, zigzag, or any stretch stitch of your choice. It's up to you whether you want to attach elastic here. I find it most comfortable to skip it, but it's all up to personal preference. Again, I recommend sewing 2 stitches, starting at the side seam, going into the center front, and then repeating from the other side seam. Before moving on, it's super important to break or remove your basting stitches here. Just since there were so many of them on this waistband, without breaking them, these bottoms are just gonna fit way too tight. Now, flip your front piece all the way to the right side. We're going to use a basting stitch and sew close the side seams and the gusset. This is to help make all the layers of fabric easier to manage for the next step. Once that's done, we're going to be attaching the front and back together. So bring the back piece back into the picture and leave it inside out. At this point, your front piece should be right side out. Making sure right sides will go together, insert the front piece inside of the back piece. Align the front and back at the side seams and the gusset and pin. We're going to be sewing all 3 of these seams. One method you can use here is when you go to sew the gusset, leave a hole so that you don't need to seam rip one later on. That is going to be up to personal preference where you like to have that final hole, whether it be here in the gusset or somewhere along a leg line or anywhere else of your choice. So sew the side seams and the gusset with a stretch stitch of your choice. Here I like to use my machine's lightning stitch or stretch stitch, but in this clip I'm just using a straight stitch, which isn't technically correct, but I don't plan for these bottoms to stretch in that direction, so it should be okay. I don't know, it's up to you. I like doing this versus an overlock because then afterwards we can go in and trim the excess, which will really help with bulk at these seams. Now, if you've left a hole in the gusset, you can skip this part, but if you need a hole, you can use a seam ripper and pick a discrete place to rip a hole just big enough to fit the bottoms through. Then, through this hole, take everything out to the right side. As a final step, finish off the hole, whether you left it in the gusset or somewhere else, with a top stitch on your machine or an invisible stitch by hand. And that completes the Carly bottoms. I'm currently 9 months pregnant, so unfortunately I can't model these for you. These are such a cute style with so many options built into this pattern, so I hope you can give them a try and let me know how it goes. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you next time.